Previously on Myron and Jenny Levitt, brother bound by love and loss.
I got a phone call from our pastor's wife, actually. Jenny and I had gotten home a little bit before the boys. They had drove separately, and Caleb was driving the boys home from this event. And so I get a phone call from my pastor's wife, and she said, do you know where your boys are at? And I said, well, they're either on their way home or, at the church. They're finishing getting everything cleaned up and ready for church tomorrow. She said, well, we were leaving the church when we came across a car accident, and it looks like Caleb's vehicle. I don't want to scare you, but the vehicle's on fire. I said, okay, no problem. Let me call them and I'll get right back to you. And so you jumped on, called Caleb, no answer, called Jacob, no answer, texted both of them to no reply. And I thought, okay, this is odd, because if one of them was driving, the other one would have replied back. We lived about 30 minutes from the church, and so I got in the vehicle. I asked my wife, I said, Jenny, why don't you stay here so when they get home you can call me, let me know. Again, thought was, it's not them. I'm just going to go head towards where this accident is at, but I'm sure I'm going to pass them on the road. But, I just asked Jenny, why don't you just stay here so when they get here, you can let me know they're here. And so she stayed. I got in the vehicle and got probably within about 5 minutes of where the accident was happening, and our assistant pastor called me on the phone. He said they have all the roads shut down. I had to kind of go back way, but I got over to where the accident is at, and he said it's definitely Caleb's truck. He said they won't tell me anything more than that. And I said, okay, no problem. So I'm about 2 minutes away. So I kind of have to go some back roads to where it's at. It was a very major intersection, but a little bit out in the country. So 4-lane highway, traffic light. And so they had shut the entire highway down. And so I get there, I pull up, and I run across the intersection, and I see probably 50 yards down the road, I actually see this big white truck rolled over. The truck is a mess, and this is like midnight or a little bit later, and it was because of the street lights were there. I could see the truck, and I'm thinking to myself, somebody did not survive that wreck. And then I see my son's truck. Again, the entire front end is ripped off the truck. So there's a cop kind of standing by. So I go over to him and I said, where are the boys that were in that truck? And the cop was like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the dad of the boys that were in that truck. He said, no. He said, there was only one. There's only one boy in that truck. I said, no, there were two boys in that truck. He said, no, sir, I'm telling you, there was only one. And he is on his way to the trauma unit. That's where you need to go. The entire time, he's pushing me back across the interstate, like literally pushing me back across the interstate, not the interstate, but the highway, and not understanding, why is he doing this? Why is he pushing me back? And so I get all the way back across the intersection, and my assistant pastor by that time is standing there beside me, and I have no idea how I didn't see it before. But I look to the left, and I see a body laying in the middle of the intersection covered in a body bag. Obviously, we had talked about Jacob's size, and was a big kid. I said, that's my son right there. The officer said, no, it's not. Your son is on his way to the hospital. I know my son. That's my son. He said, it's not your son. So I'm really confused, about the whole deal. And about that time, and again, if you've ever experienced anything like this before, it's just so confusing, and your mind is going everywhere. And I remember I'm standing there, I'm looking over at this body laying in the middle of the intersection, and this guilt hits me. I mean, like a sledgehammer. I drop to my knees. I'm holding my head, and I'm not weeping. I'm not crying. I'm just, all of these images are hitting me. Some people say, when you're, getting ready to pass away, your life kind of flashes before your eyes. Well, it wasn't my life that was flashing before my eyes. It was all my failures as a dad. It seemed like it went on for minutes, but really what it was, it was just a few seconds. Kind of collect myself, and I asked my pastor's wife was there as well, and I said, can you go home and get Jenny and meet us at the hospital? And so I got back in our vehicle, and I'm so confused, because this cop is telling me this is not your son. That your son that's not who's underneath that body bag. And so I'm just kind of in a haze. I drive to the hospital. Again, my assistant pastor was with me. He was riding with me, and we get to the hospital. Get there, and they're not not telling me anything. They have no information. So finally, Jenny, my assistant pastor's wife, Tiffany, gets out to where our house is at, picks up Jenny, and then on the way to the hospital, and can I pick up from there?
Well, first of all, you think in that initial, like, this can't be. This happens to other people. This doesn't happen to us. Yeah. So you're still kind of in that, like, disbelief and shock. And, so she picked me up. I still remember when we were driving, she purposely drove the longest way around that she could so I wouldn't be right next to the accident. But even 7 years later, I can still remember when I turned my head to the right while we were passing. And the accident would have been probably half a mile down, but the entire intersection was just full of emergency personnel. It was out in the country at 12-something at night, so it was dark, it was drizzling rain, and that impression, like, embedded in my brain, where for about the first year after the accident, there were times when I had to call him when I was driving home late in similar situations. Mm-hmm. Twice that I remember, I came across bad accidents in the same type of situation, drizzly rain, late at night. And I realize now it was probably some kind of like panic attack or something, but I had to call him and stay on the line with him until I could get home, because I was just like, whoa, But so we made it to the hospital, and there was just still so much confusion. Them telling us that there wasn't, again, they were just, for the longest several hours, they kept saying, no, it was just one son. And, he was starting to doubt himself, like, well, did I really see that? There's just so much confusion. And in the meantime, we are absolutely blessed to be part of a wonderful church community, and a lot of those same people that we had just been volunteering with and putting on that event, I don't know, probably 100 of them?
Maybe more than that were in the waiting room at the hospital. They're just like, honestly, looking back, it seemed like there's a couple hundred people there. I don't know if there's that many, but, it's a large hospital, and there's this massive, lobby area where people can congregate, and there's just people everywhere.